Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown, and I see Matthew there in a Snoopy shirt.
And Mike sitting in a really cute robe with Keith Haring print on it. Is it like a short robe, like in the 70s?
No, it's not short. It's a long robe. It's really nice and cozy.
It does look cozy.
It definitely is.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
In the quiet, close-knit community of Fosterville, New Brunswick, a crime of unspeakable horror shattered the peace on November 26, 1924. Two young sisters, Cynthia, 14, and Necia Foster, 10, were found bound, gagged, and brutally murdered in the lakeside camp of their uncle, Harry D. Williams. The sheer brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the region, making it one of the most infamous cases in New Brunswick history. This is Dark Poutine episode 354, The Fosterville Murders. Fosterville, in York County, New Brunswick, is nestled near the Chippetneticook Lakes, which form part of the border between Canada and Maine in the United States. In 1924, life here revolved around farming, logging, and mutual dependence. Everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. The region around Fosterville was traditionally part of the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq territories, with indigenous presence dating back over 10,000 years. These groups utilized the interconnected waterways and forests for hunting, fishing, and seasonal migration. North Lake, part of the lake chain, was a resource-rich area known to indigenous peoples through oral traditions and localized place names like Benny Bell Field and Kneeland Ridge. The broader Wabanaki Confederacy, which included the Wolastoqiyik and Mi'kmaq, maintained trade networks and cultural practices tied to the land. European contact began with French explorers in the late 1600s, but sustained settlement in the area emerged later. By the 19th century, Loyalist descendants and other migrants established agricultural communities. Fosterville originated with land grants to brothers David and Josiah Foster in the mid-1800s, becoming a hub for farming and lumbering. The community's name reflects this founding family, with William Foster serving as its first postmaster in 1889. Today, Fosterville remains a quiet border community with seasonal tourism anchored in its historical roots as a rural New Brunswick settlement. Harry D. Williams was Ward Foster's half-brother-in-law. His mother had remarried after Harry's father died, making him the half-brother of Ward's wife. But Harry was an outsider in many ways. He lived alone in a shack on the shores of North Lake, earning a meager living as a laborer and potato picker in Maine. Neighbors described him as a hermit, but noted his odd affection for the Foster children, particularly Cynthia. On the afternoon of November 25, 1924, Cynthia and Necia left school and headed to Harry's cabin. This wasn't unusual. The girls often helped their uncle with chores, cooking, and cleaning. But that day, Harry had explicitly requested their company at his small, isolated, and sparsely furnished cabin. Their father, Ward, grew worried when the girls didn't return home by nightfall. He trekked to Harry's cabin and made a discovery that would haunt him forever. Ward was met with a gruesome sight. Blood, bone, and brain matter were splattered all over the floor, walls, and bedding. His daughter Cynthia's body lay on the bed, her arms tied behind her back with a half-inch rope, while little Necia's body was partially hidden under the bed, her legs bound with a cotton cord. Both had been shot execution-style with a .38-55 Winchester rifle. The brutality of the injuries was staggering. Cynthia's skull was fractured by a bullet that entered below her right eye and exited above her left ear, tearing through pillows and a mattress before embedding itself in the wall. Necia's temporal bone was blown outward by a shot fired behind her right ear. The coroner, Dr. W.L. Turner, noted the girls' limbs were bound so tightly that the ropes left deep indentations in their flesh. Cynthia's mouth was stuffed with a cloth, a bag was tied around her, and a towel was over her face. Necia's legs were bound with a cord likely to immobilize her. Shell casings and bullet fragments indicated deliberate close-range shots. The flattened bullet found in the wall matched the soft-nosed cartridges later found in Williams's rifle. Dr. W.L. Turner's autopsy confirmed Cynthia had been sexually assaulted with blood staining her undergarments. As this detail emerged, people were outraged. Cynthia's skirt had been pulled up to her waist, but her boots and stockings remained on, suggesting a brutal attack and a chaotic struggle. Dr. Turner later said, quote, "The world has never seen a more gruesome scene than that camp." End quote. Deputy Sheriff Fraser Saunders later said, quote, "It was an awful sight for a man to see." End quote.
You know, Mike, we often get requests, sometimes, to cover cases where children were hurt or murdered.
Yes, yeah, and this is one of them.
But we usually don't do them. I was skimming this script when you sent it to me, you know, just on my phone, you know, just an initial, hey, what's it about? And I'd missed the year that this happened at the beginning. Right. And I was going to text you to say that I wasn't up for doing this episode. And I think it's interesting, you know, I was recently reading about a statue of the Buddha where he's smiling, and the smile is called the smile of unbearable compassion. Mm-hmm. The point of the statue is that he understands the full weight of suffering, but still chooses to keep his heart open, not turning away from it. But he's able to not be consumed by it as well. Mm. And I think while you and I might be a little bit enlightened, we're definitely not Buddhas. And for me anyway, I don't know about you, I can get consumed by my compassion for victims sometimes on the show, and it can be painful, right? And covering historical cases sort of, I think it gives me that illusion that I'm facing the horror, but it's at arm's length because it's so long ago. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's safety in time, or in black and white photos or news clippings, and sort of almost like relics from another world, you know, and it's it lets us engage fully without opening ourselves to the rawness of it as much. It was listener Allie Van Brussel who suggested this, and she says that it's a bonkers story from her family history. And I don't know which family, is it the Fosters that she is a part of, or is she part of the family who helped to prosecute, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. She didn't indicate that. Right. However, what struck me, and this is kind of why I wanted to do this story, is because there are so many
parallels that could have happened today with this story, and I think that's why I'm kind of glad you got confused about it, because that's what I was driving at.
Yeah.
I wanted people to see, hey, just because this was 100 years ago, there are still a lot of elements in this particular story that are relevant today, which is really fascinating.
Anyway, thank you for making it an old one so I can have a bit of self-preservation.
Right. Harry Williams, of course, vanished immediately after the murders. A posse of 25 armed men led by County Warden Arthur Wetmore combed the woods along the international border. Williams was described as about 30 years old, weighing approximately 165 pounds, stood 5 feet 10 inches tall, and was a good-looking man with rosy cheeks and a medium complexion. Initially, authorities believed Williams had escaped across the lake to the United States, but the freezing cold forced him back to Fosterville. He unexpectedly appeared on the road near Magistrate John Foster's residence, not far from where the crime occurred on the morning of the following day. Upon encountering Williams, Magistrate Foster declared, "Just the man we're looking for." Williams responded simply, "All right, take me." The magistrate and a constable then took him into custody, watching over him until the sheriff arrived. Magistrate Foster told Williams, "This is an awful crime you've committed," and Williams responded coldly, "Oh, not much of a crime." Williams' .38-55 Winchester rifle was found by a fence in the woods where he said he'd hidden it. The accused murderer was transported to Fredericton, 81 miles away, where he was placed in a cell at the city police station. His appearance was disheveled, sporting a heavy beard and rugged outdoor clothing typical of a lumberjack. He was given fresh clothing and asked to take a bath, but that was denied him that evening. According to a newspaper report, quote, "Before he was put in a cell at the police station last night, Williams' braces, his bootlaces, and the contents of the pockets of his clothing were taken away from him by Chief of Police Jones so that no means of self-destruction would be available. A handkerchief, cigarette papers, and tobacco, matches, and several coins were all that police officers could find in his pockets." End quote. Williams warmed himself by the stove, calmly smoked a cigarette, and soon fell asleep on the cot in his cell. The tiny community was shaken by the first double murder in York County's recorded history. An investigation into Williams's past revealed a fractured identity. Born as Darius Thornton in Nakawick County, New Brunswick, Williams was about 41 years old at the time of the murders in 1924. Instability and brushes with the law marked his early life. He was arrested in Woodstock along with 2 other young men as a youth for stealing brass from a local mill. While one of his accomplices received a suspended sentence, Williams, then known as Thornton, was sent to the New Brunswick Reformatory for a 3-year term.
Mike, so often we see troublemakers on this show who have changed their name more than once.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if I meet somebody who's changed their name a bunch of times, I think I'm going to be a little bit nervous about them.
Well, yeah. I mean, my name was changed, but just because I was adopted.
Well, that doesn't count.
No, it wasn't because I was a criminal.
You weren't like, oh no, I have to change my name because I did some awful things.
Yeah, I was 3 months old and had done some terrible
you already had a rap sheet as long as my arm at 3.
Yeah, exactly. 3 months. 3 months.
3 months. A rap sheet. I just picture this little 3-month-old baby stick him up.
I'm a bad apple.
The man, later known as Harry Williams, married Ada Clark, a widow with 4 children in Victoria Corner, Carleton County. The couple had 2 children together, though one died in infancy. Their marriage was tumultuous, with Williams exhibiting erratic behavior. Ada later reported that he would have unexplained, quote, spells and disappear for days at a time. Williams abruptly abandoned his family without explanation after about 7 to 8 years of marriage. He enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force during World War I under the alias Harry D. Williams. Harry Williams' World War I service spanned critical years of combat and reflected the grueling realities of frontline duty. Williams enlisted with the Canadian Garrison Artillery and was initially stationed in St. John, New Brunswick. His military trajectory shifted in September of 1918 when he was deployed overseas with a draft of the 4th Siege Battery, part of Canada's heavy artillery units. Upon arriving in Europe, he was reassigned to the 3rd Divisional Ammunition Column in France, responsible for supplying artillery units with ammunition, vital to sustaining frontline operations.
You know, the Canadian Expeditionary Force in World War I, it wasn't just another army. They punched above their weight.
They definitely did.
And they had a reputation for as one of the most formidable fighting forces in the war. I think one of the coolest things about the CEF is it's the birth of shock troops reputation. And by 1917, the soldiers were known for their ability to take on the toughest assignments, things like storming enemy trenches, breaking deadlocks, fighting with reckless determination.
This is Canadian soldiers that you're talking
I know, it's cool. And I think the Battle of Vimy Ridge is a great example. You know, the British and the French repeatedly failed to take the ridge. The Canadians got in there and pulled it off in 3 days.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Here we go, boys.
Yeah, let's do this thing. By the war's final months, Williams transferred to the trench mortars of the 3rd Canadian Division, a unit engaged in close quarters combat. Trench mortars were essential for attacking enemy fortifications, but their operators faced extreme danger due to their proximity to hostile lines. Williams served with his unit until the armistice on November 11, 1918, enduring the harrowing conditions of trench warfare without sustaining physical injuries. His total overseas service exceeded 3 years, and he was discharged in March 1919, shortly before the Canadian Discharge Depot relocated from Fredericton to St. John. After the war, Williams returned to New Brunswick. Although he had not been physically wounded, he struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. He drifted between jobs working as a section man on the Bangor-Aroostook Railroad in Maine for a time. Eventually, he settled into a reclusive existence in a small cabin on North Lake near Fosterville, where he lived for 13 or 14 years leading up to the murders. Despite his troubled past, Williams integrated somewhat into the Fosterville community. He was known as a well-read, jovial man who could converse on many subjects. Local young people often visited his cabin, enjoying his company and hospitality. However, there were signs of inappropriate attachments and jealousy toward his young nieces, particularly Cynthia, which tragically foreshadowed the horrific crime to come. The wheels of justice turned much faster in those days, and Williams was arraigned on the murder charges the day after his arrest. Still in his cell, Williams spoke to a reporter before being brought into court. He was wearing a blue suit supplied to him for the occasion, but was still unshaven. Quote, "I am feeling pretty fair today is about all I can say this morning," said Williams. When asked about whether he confessed to the murders during his arrest, Williams said, quote, "I have made no statement, and I don't think I should say anything further just now except to deny that I have made any admission of my guilt." He continued, "I have not said anything with any bearing upon the crime with which I am charged since I gave myself up yesterday at John Foster's." End quote. When asked why he'd given himself up, Williams said, quote, "I found out a crime had been committed in my cabin. I knew that I would be suspected and blamed. I was shocked at what I had found out, and after spending the night in the woods, I thought I had better give myself up, so I went to John Foster's place, knowing he was a magistrate, and was going to the house when they came out and met me." End quote. Williams initially denied ever having another name. However, in the days after his arrest, in a letter to his half-sister, Mrs. Ward Foster, Williams admitted he had changed his name from Thornton to Williams, specifically to prevent his wife from finding him. It's unclear why his half-sister didn't know that already. He repeated the confession to a reporter later on. Williams jumped to his feet rather nervously when Judge Limerick called his name in court that day. The judge informed Williams of the charges and told him he would be remanded until his next court appearance a week later. According to the Daily Gleaner on November 29, 1924, quote, 2 hours after Harry D. Williams had been formally arraigned in the police court yesterday afternoon on the charge of murdering his 2 half-nieces at Fosterville, He had been quietly transferred from the city police station to the York County Jail to await his next appearance before Judge Limerick on December 6, until which date he has been remanded. The transfer was quietly effected by Chief of Police Jones, Williams being conveyed to the jail in an automobile so as to avoid crowds which it was feared would gather. 10 minutes from the time he was directed to put on his boots and outer clothing at the police station, Williams was divested of the same garments in his cell at the county jail, where he is without shoelaces or suspenders. The same precautions are being observed to forestall any possible attempt at suicide. Police officer Harry McNeil's car was used to transfer the prisoner to jail. McNeil, acting as chauffeur, and the chief of police and his prisoner were accompanied by a reporter for the Gleaner. The side curtains of the car had been placed in a position to shield Williams from the gaze of curious spectators who had hung about City Hall during the day hoping to gain a look at the accused. At 4:45 p.m., Williams was given his boots and told to don outer garments for the short trip. Completely dressed, his hands were manacled, although this precaution hardly seemed necessary on account of his quiet and deferential attitude, and the prisoner emerged from the police station in the gathering twilight. Walking up the steps to the outer entrance, he stumbled, but saved himself from falling with his manacled hands. His entrance to the police car was practically unnoticed. As the car was proceeding out York Street to Brunswick Street, Williams finally spoke to the chief with whom he was occupying the rear seat. "I want to thank you, Chief, for all the kindness you have shown me," he said. "I don't suppose I will see you again. I have appreciated your kindness very much." "Oh, but we'll see you again, if we live, when you come back to court next week," replied Chief Jones. Williams was assigned to a roomy cell on the top floor of the southwest corner of the building, where he found awaiting him a loaf of bread and 2 pans of water. A request for matches was denied, the barred door of the cell shut behind him, the cell light was switched off from the outside, and Williams was left alone in the dark with his thoughts. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts?
What was the name of the person who recommended this story to us?
Allie Van Brussel.
So it's really interesting. I didn't realize that Allie had recommended it to us, and I was sitting here thinking, okay, it's almost 100 years old, and and then I realized my great grandparents, who I knew, they lived until the late 1990s, right? So I knew them all my life. They would have been like 25 and 24 years old when this happened.
My grandmother was 13, yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of these things where you can think, when it's something like this, and murder of children, especially. Just again, we've spoken about this a few times. This stuff ripples through for almost 100 years now.
Yeah.
Right? Like, my grandparents would have known about this, and Allie's talking about it. We're doing the show. So, murder isn't, like, it has a ripple effect, right?
Definitely. Yep.
And I think one of the other things that I'm finding, this guy seems so calm. So calm through all of this.
Yeah, it's very strange. Newspapers reported that Cynthia Foster, the 14-year-old victim of the Fosterville murders, had had an eerie premonition of her fate on the day she was killed. According to witness accounts, Cynthia had lunch with her aunt on November 25, 1924, just hours before her murder. While they ate, she confided her deep unease about visiting her Uncle Harry Williams' camp that afternoon. The young girl reportedly told her aunt, quote, "I don't want to go to my Uncle Harry's camp today. I wish he was 1,000 miles away from here," end quote. 4 of the 14 foster children typically visited Williams' cabin together, but on this particular day, only Cynthia and Necia went. As one newspaper account noted, quote, "If all 4 girls had gone to the camp, there would have doubtless have been 4 victims of the tragedy instead of 2. For in the death shack on the lake shore, enough extra sets of rope and cords to bind more than 2 victims, such as were used to bind Cynthia and Necia, have been found," end quote. On January 20th, 1925, after a lengthy jury selection process that took 6 hours and involved 31 potential jurors, a panel of 12 married men was finally chosen for Williams' trial. The defense counsel, Fred H. Peters, challenged many jurors and employed various delaying tactics, succeeding in postponing the start of the evidence presentation. First came the portion of the trial to determine whether Williams was sane and fit to stand trial for the murders. In an evening session, Crown Prosecutor Peter J. Hughes outlined the case against Williams. He emphasized that Williams, formerly known as Darius Thornton, had explicitly requested the girl's presence at his shack on the day of the murders. Hughes described it as, quote, perhaps the most terrible crime which has ever been committed in the county, end quote. Notably, he did not mention Williams' alleged confessions, stating he, quote, would not go into them as there were possible objections to them, end quote. The prosecution's case focused on Williams' relationship to the victims, his actions leading up to the murders, and the crime scene evidence. Hughes detailed how Williams had asked for the girls to visit him, saying, quote, unfortunately, Mrs. Foster's condition of health following the recent birth of a child prevented her from attendance in court, but one of the Foster boys would be called to show that Williams had asked that the girls be allowed to go to the camp, end quote. Mr. Justice LeBlanc announced that witnesses requested by the defense would be subpoenaed at public expense given Williams' destitute condition. This came after Peters attempted to introduce statements from Williams' ex-wife about his past behavior. The trial's first witness was Ward B. Foster, the father of the murdered girls, and the man who discovered the crime. His testimony and cross-examination occupied the entire morning session. The defense expressed interest in calling Williams' ex-wife, Ada Thornton, as a witness potentially to support an insanity defense. However, her residence in Maine complicated this effort. The testimonies of brothers Claude and Enoch Peck provided critical evidence in the murder trial. Their collaborative accounts detailed Williams's confessions and behavior during his arrest and contradicted Williams' denials regarding confessing. During Williams's apprehension near John Foster's on November 26, 1924, he surrendered without resistance, saying, quote, don't hurt me, I'm going to give myself up. Enoch Peck testified that Claude Peck issued a formal warning to Williams in the transport vehicle advising him, quote, he didn't have to answer any questions, end quote, and that, quote, anything he said could be used against him, end quote. Williams allegedly responded directly, quote, I know it, I killed the girls, and I expect to pay the supreme penalty, end quote. Turning to Claude, he cryptically added, quote, but I didn't do what you think I did, perhaps referring to sexual assault. However, this statement later became a focal point for the defense, which argued ambiguity in Williams's admissions. Enoch Peck described how Williams directed them to Tom Kinney's field to retrieve his rifle, emphasizing, quote, you'll find what I'm telling you is true, end quote. Footprints matching Williams's work boots and trampled grass marked the spot where Enoch located the firearm, and it was linked conclusively to bullets found under the bed on which Cynthia Foster's body lay. Enoch noted Williams' calm demeanor during this process, which prosecutors cited as evidence of premeditation. Harry D. Williams' post-arrest behavior, including his vomiting, became a focal point in understanding his mental state and actions following the murders. According to Enoch Peck's testimony, Williams exhibited physical distress shortly after his surrender, vomiting at John Foster's home while in custody. When questioned about this reaction, Williams claimed he had attempted suicide by ingesting strychnine, stating, I took too much strychnine and I vomited it up. The prosecution interpreted this episode as evidence of premeditation, arguing Williams' suicide attempt reflected consciousness of guilt. Crown Prosecutor P.J. Hughes highlighted Williams's calm demeanor during confessions, suggesting calculated intent. Conversely, defense counsel Fred H. Peters framed the vomiting and erratic behavior as signs of mental instability exacerbated by wartime trauma.
You know,
Yeah.
I just think he's odd, not insane.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about insanity towards the end of this, I have an interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I honestly think he definitely knew what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
whatever. He ran away afterward and then realized I'm not getting away, so I'll just turn myself in. The physical evidence against Harry D. Williams in the Fosterville murders was extensive and methodically documented. To recap, Dr. W.L. Turner's medical examination revealed Cynthia Foster, 14, had been sexually assaulted before her murder, with bloodstains on her undergarments unrelated to her fatal head wound. Both girls were bound with ropes and cotton cords so tightly that the restraints left visible indentations on their flesh. Cynthia's mouth was gagged with a rolled seamless bag tied around her head, while Necia, 10, was found under the bed with her legs bound. Ballistic evidence directly linked Williams' Winchester .38-55 rifle to the crime. 2 spent shells were recovered at the scene, and a bullet that passed through Cynthia's skull was found embedded in the cabin wall, matching the rifle's caliber. The weapon itself, discovered where Williams had indicated, had 2 notches carved into its butt, a grim tally later interpreted as symbolic of the double homicide. Forensic details included blood-soaked rifle shells near Necia's body and feathers from pillows pierced by bullets. Investigators also found additional cords and ropes in the cabin, identical to those used on the victim, stored on shelves with fishing hooks. A seamless bag matching the one used to gag Cynthia was identified as part of Williams's possessions. Circumstantial evidence further implicated Williams. His dog was found tied up to prevent it from following him, and he admitted hiding the rifle after fleeing. Despite the destruction of blood-stained clothing and bedding during the victim's funeral preparations, the preserved ropes, bullets, and rifle formed a damning physical chain of evidence. Medical testimony from Dr. W.L. Turner did not directly address the vomiting, but noted Williams' physical state aligned with the acute poisoning symptoms, including pallor and agitation. The defense attempted to link these observations to broader psychiatric disturbances, though no formal insanity diagnosis was entered during the trial. Williams's explanation, quote, "I didn't know what was the matter with me," underscored the defense's portrayal of a man grappling with unresolved psychological trauma. Williams's former wife, Ada Thornton from Houlton, Maine, also testified. Despite the negative things Williams had to say about her, Mrs. Thornton expressed no ill will toward him. She believed that his denials about his former identity and their children showed that he was not in his right mind. When confronted with Williams's claim that he had left her because she had, quote, "gone to bad," Mrs. Thornton said that she couldn't believe he would say such a thing. She recalled that Williams had always been quiet, unassuming, and kind-hearted. Mrs. Thornton could not fathom any motive for the crime other than insanity. She speculated that Williams's mind might have been undermined by his experiences during the war because, as we mentioned, he had served 4 years and mainly in the trenches.
What does it mean, gone to bad? She had gone to bad.
She had gone to bed. I don't know. That's kind of an older term that I'm not really familiar with.
It has so many potential meanings.
Maybe she's drinking. Maybe she's, cheating on him. Maybe she's just cranky. I don't know.
Gone to bad.
She's gone to bed. She's gone to bed, that one. Oh, well, whatever.
That's hilarious.
Mrs. Thornton also shared that Williams used to have unexplained spells and would disappear for days at a time when they were married. She believed that if he had indeed committed the murders, it must have been due to some mental illness that caused him to plan and act with a disturbing level of cunning. Despite everything, Mrs. Thornton maintained that she could not believe Harry Williams would have committed such a crime in his right mind. Ward Foster was called on again, and he dramatically described discovering the bodies in Williams' cabin on November 25, 1924, and how he found his daughters. Foster emphasized the absence of any signs that supper had been prepared, contradicting Williams' earlier promise to the girls, and noted the camp's cold and disheveled state, so there hadn't been any cleaning done either. He'd probably attack them as soon as they got there.
Let me stop here.
Okay.
Imagine being the dad of these girls and finding this.
Right.
You know, we kind of, so he found them, but I'm just like, oh, that was their dad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just can't imagine the scene.
No.
Terrible.
Ward Foster testified to Williams' unusual relationship with the family, revealing that he had changed his name from Darius Thornton to avoid his wife and had assigned $5 monthly from his military pay to Cynthia, whom he called his pet. He described Williams as reserved with neighbors but intimately involved with the Fosters, often giving gifts and hosting the children at his cabin. Foster also highlighted the absence of Williams's protective dog Towser, which was found chained in the Foster barn the morning after the murders, a detail he implied suggested premeditation. Williams's counsel, Fred H. Peters, suggested that Harry D. Williams claimed to have had disturbing experiences in the trenches during his World War I service that were central to his defense's argument about his mental state. These, Peters said, contributed to psychological trauma. While specific reports of Williams' military service were unavailable, Peters argued that the stresses of wartime, including prolonged exposure to combat and isolation, could have triggered hallucinations or a fractured psyche.
You know, World War I, there weren't drones, there wasn't distance fighting. It was direct and brutal.
It was close up. I mean, they called it shell shock in the day, but it was PTSD, and whether or not he had PTSD doesn't, detract from what he did.
I bet you 99% of the people in World War I had PTSD.
My grandfather, Dad's dad, was in the trenches during World War I, and he was not an altogether person after. He was a grumpy guy and didn't like to talk and wouldn't eat mutton because he said that's all they were fed in the trenches, etc. Wow. And it reminded him, Did
he drink?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I have never been able to quite establish that.
Okay.
Although Dad did say at one time, did you know that dentists, which my grandfather was one, have the highest rate of alcoholism of any other profession? And he just kind of left it at that, and I didn't really...
In other words, Mike, don't become a dentist.
Yeah. But maybe he was referring to his own dad.
Yeah, maybe.
Williams claimed hallucinations of an old man attempting to steal his false teeth, which his defense linked to wartime trauma. This delusion was presented as evidence of mental instability, with Peters drawing parallels to the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde duality to suggest Williams experienced a personality split under stress. Medical testimony described him as suffering warped perceptions and delusions, though prosecutors dismissed these as feigned. The psychiatric evaluations of Harry D. Williams during his sanity trial revealed starkly conflicting interpretations of his mental state, anchored in competing medical perspectives. Dr. Charles McKay, a Fredericton physician, testified that Williams exhibited marked mental confusion and hallucinations during his examination. After 2 hours of clinical tests, he noted Williams' sluggish and apathetic demeanor, disorientation, and inability to comprehend his legal predicament. He concluded, quote, "The symptoms pointed to the conclusion that the man was suffering from acute confusional insanity." McKay emphasized Williams' hesitancy of speech and difficulty collecting his thoughts, arguing these signs indicated a psychotic break rather than a deliberate evasion. Dr. W.H. Irvine, with 31 years of medical practice, diagnosed Williams with dementia, describing a, quote, "total absence of proper mentality." He cited Williams's lack of awareness during the questioning and impaired cognitive function, stating, quote, "The prisoner didn't know what they were there for at the time of the examination," end quote. However, Irvine acknowledged that the challenge of distinguishing genuine insanity from potential simulation, noting Williams' unchanging gaze and emotional detachment during the proceedings. Dr. D.R. Moore, a specialist in mental diseases, identified physical markers of degeneracy, including an asymmetrical ear structure he termed as amentia stigmata. He argued Williams' lopsided ear, and the difference in perpendicular aligned with congenital mental deficiency. Moore also reported Williams' hallucinations, claiming he heard voices at night and concluded, quote, his behavior did not measure up to that of the normal individual, end quote. Despite Williams's calm exterior, Moore classified him as approaching, quote, confusional aberration. Dr. Anglin, the provincial alienist, directly countered the defense's claims after observing Williams in court and conducting brief examinations. He dismissed the insanity diagnosis, instead labeling Williams a degenerate and, quote, high-grade imbecile or moron. Anglin testified, quote, he is not insane but a high-grade imbecile or moron, capable of distinguishing right from wrong, end quote. He highlighted Williams's rational responses to questions and ability to read and write in jail and lack of typical insanity symptoms like restlessness or incoherence. Anglin attributed Williams' courtroom indifference to resignation, suggesting, quote, he might be expecting a certain end and is resigned to his fate. He further noted Williams' unchanging facial expressions during graphic testimony as evidence of calculated detachment and not mental incapacity. Dr. Anglin believed that Williams was only insane when it benefited him.
It's really interesting. We're getting a lot of ideas chucked in there about...
It's all just speculating what's going on in somebody else's head.
Insanity, not insanity. All, like, so many, like, you can go this way, or you can come in that way, or you can come sideways, or you can come the other side, right?
It's stuff that we see in a lot of trials today.
Yeah.
People talking about this exact same stuff. Well, he didn't react. He wasn't reacting to... Okay, because we know what's going on inside somebody's head. Whether or not Williams was sane was left in the hands of the jury. After 43 minutes of deliberation, they ultimately sided with the Crown, finding Williams sane and fit to stand trial. Next came the guilt phase, during which much of the same evidence was presented. On January 29, 1925, the jury deliberated just 10 minutes before delivering a guilty verdict. Justice LeBlanc condemned Williams's abominable crime, sentencing him to hang on April 23, 1925. Williams remained eerily impassive, staring blankly as the sentence was read. A subsequent appeal for Williams's life failed. Notably, Williams refused to be sworn as a witness during his trial, maintaining an indifferent demeanor throughout the proceedings. According to local news reports, in the wake of the momentous trial, Sheriff Hawthorne found himself at the center of a grim task, the preparation for an impending execution. The sheriff, known for his taciturn nature, was particularly reticent when approached about his plans for the grim event. Despite his reluctance to divulge details, he did confirm one crucial aspect. An expert hangman would be employed to carry out the sentence. Speculation was rife that Ellis, the renowned Dominion hangman, would be called on for this solemn duty. This speculation later proved true. The sheriff had previously expressed confidence that the necessary preparations, including the erection of the gallows, would be carried out discreetly without drawing undue attention from the public. Emphasizing his commitment to a flawless execution of justice, Sheriff Hawthorne declared, quote, there will be no bungling in the carrying out of the court's sentence. I will take every precaution to prevent anything of that kind, end quote. His words carried the weight of historical significance, for this execution would mark the end of a 94-year hiatus in capital punishment for murder in York County. The last hanging occurred in 1931 near what was then referred to as the old burial grounds.
Ooh. You know, this sheriff doesn't seem to me like some bloodthirsty enforcer eager to put a man to death.
No.
You know, he actually seems like a guy that wanted to get through with it without making a mess of it, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think, you know, he kind of has a reluctance to talk. He's insisting on hiring experts. You know, he has this quiet focus about not bungling things.
He's got a job to do.
And it points to a man who saw this as kind of a grim duty, not a triumph, right?
Yeah.
And He seems to want to do it quietly, but the fact that this was the first hanging in nearly a century makes that impossible, because I think no matter how much Hawthorne wanted to handle it discreetly, this was history, and history rarely happens quietly.
We're seeing that right now.
Yeah.
Right now, we're seeing history happen very loudly.
Yeah.
Anyway, which is good, I guess. Whatever. The machinery of justice began to move swiftly following the sentencing. Death guards assumed their posts at the jail immediately after Williams, the condemned man, was returned from the courtroom where he had received his death sentence. A vigilant watch was established, with guards maintaining an unbroken vigil over the prisoner. Sheriff Hawthorne explained to the Gleaner newspaper that this round-the-clock surveillance would continue unabated until the day of execution, with 2 officers alternating shifts to ensure constant supervision. On the morning following the sentencing, Williams received a visit from Reverend Dean Niels, who served as his spiritual advisor throughout his incarceration in the York County Jail. Sheriff Hawthorne noted that Williams' demeanor remained unchanged despite this pastoral care. Darius Thornton, known as Harry D. Williams, was executed by hanging at the York County Jail in Fredericton, New Brunswick on April 23, 1925, for the brutal murders of his 2 nieces, Cynthia and Necia Foster. Preparations for the event were meticulous. The gallows, erected specifically for the event in a barn behind the jail, was shielded from public view to avoid attracting crowds. Williams faced his fate with eerie composure. In his final days, he wrote nearly 20 letters, sang hymns, and prayed, declaring to a reporter, quote, "The Lord has been carrying me along day by day." Dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, the executioner Ellis cuffed Williams and escorted him to the gallows by guards. Dean Niels, the spiritual advisor, recited the 23rd Psalm as Williams ascended the scaffold. The trapdoor opened at 12:01 a.m., and he was pronounced dead 12 minutes later after a fractured neck. Ellis noted the efficiency of the drop over 8 feet, ensuring a swift end. Williams' final note absolved his lawyer, Fred Peters, of involvement in his courtroom feigned insanity, stating Peters had acted, quote, true to his conscience. So he'd been faking, of course.
You see right there, right? He's saying, yeah, I was faking it, right?
Yeah.
But let me ask you a question, Mike. If somebody rapes and murders children, are they ever sane?
Well, this is the thing.
You know what I mean? Like, if you murder somebody else, there's something wrong with your head. This
is the thing that I've struggled with the entire time that I have had an interest in true crime.
Yeah.
It is an insane act. It is 100% an insane act to take somebody's life, to do what this guy did.
Yeah.
However, he knew exactly what he was doing, and that's where the legal definition is.
Yeah.
It's, does he understand what he's doing? Does he understand the consequences of what he's doing? If the answer is yes, he is legally sane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether or not it's a sane act
he's still insane, but he's legally sane, if you know what I mean, right?
Right. Like, how could you say somebody like Willie Picton was sane?
Yeah.
You can't.
Well, almost anyone who's been that we've covered on the show who's killed somebody else, you kind of can't, right?
No.
And I think what's really interesting about this as well is, you know, he is faking it. He's admitting to faking it. But all these experts pile in going, oh, yes, because of this and that, he's insane. And him writing this letter is just like, like, you guys are morons.
Everybody's got an agenda.
You can find an expert to talk any side you want ever in court.
Yep. The small group of witnesses to the execution, including jurors, medical examiners, and press, observed the proceedings in solemn silence. Dean Niels later described Williams as fully penitent, claiming he felt forgiven and had embraced faith fervently. Sheriff Hawthorne and Executioner Ellis maintained strict control, directing attendees to remove their hats as a sign of respect. After his death, Williams' body was buried privately in Fredericton's rural cemetery, avoiding the jail's Potter's Field at his mother's request. After the execution, Ward Foster, the victim's father, bluntly stated, "Hanging is too good for him," yet some locals expressed grim satisfaction that justice had been served.
Yeah. Hanging's too good for him. Well, what else?
Burning at the stake? Something painful and horrific.
Ripping into his body with your own hands? I don't think we want to go there.
No. No, I don't think so. And that's it for Dark Poutine, episode 354, The Fosterville Murders.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
All right. Here is our first voicemail and only voicemail for this week.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. Love the message. I have just finished listening to the Westray episode, and being from Nova Scotia, born in Cape Breton, I really enjoyed it. You did a fantastic job on it, but it reminded me that I've kept needing to reach out about a story I think you should cover, and that's the McDonald's murders in Sydney, Nova Scotia. They happened, I can't believe I don't remember if it was a couple days before or a couple days after Westray, so I think that you should cover it. I think those victims need to keep having a voice so we never forget. Okay, take care and go have a shit in your cap. Okay, take care. Bye.
Thanks for calling, and you're in luck because we've already done that. Matthew and I did that in episode 203 of the show.
I was sitting there going, I think
this sounds familiar. Yeah. Yeah.
So 203.
203. So yeah, go have a listen to episode 203 and you will hopefully hear what you were hoping to hear. Unless there was another McDonald's murders.
I hope not. I hope look at us getting a back catalog, Mike.
Right? Well, with 354 episodes, people do tend to miss things. I mean, it's well, we're not judging you for missing it. It's just it is what it is.
I sometimes can't remember ones we've done because we've done so many. You started writing one that we already did last week.
I did. But I was writing it from a perspective, a different perspective, which was interesting. So it's like, oh, this is interesting from this angle. Right. And I thought, while I was writing it, I was like, I know I've done this. and then so I went back through the catalog and there it is. And it's like, what I had written for the new episode was so different. So it's like, even though there's a lot of similar facts, obviously,
but you found an aspect of it that you found interesting.
Exactly, exactly. There was an aspect of the case that I found more interesting, and so I'm wondering, there are probably a few cases from way back that I would love to redo. So maybe that's the thing. There's a good catalog of cases that I did with that other person, and we I think you and I would have different perspective on it. Even myself, because I've already
done it.
I've grown as a human being since over the 7 years that I've been doing this. And
as a podcaster and as somebody who understands implications of things and who understands true crime a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I listen to some of the things that I've said or read some of the things that I've written from back there, and I think, ugh.
You're like, dough.
Yeah, that wasn't good. That wasn't good. My perspective was skewed on things, and I'm sure that it's that way now. So anyway, thank you for your voicemail. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. All right, we do have a donut money donor this week.
Donuts.
And that person who's donating donut money is Lindsay Kahn, Cann. And I don't know where Lindsay is from, Matthew.
Where is Lindsay from?
Yes. That's what I'm asking you.
She's from Cannes.
Like in France?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
That's where she gets her last name from.
It's spelled differently. However, that's okay. And what does she do there in France?
She owns a little cafe on the top of the hill.
Okay.
If you know that old hill and you go like to the top of Cannes, right up.
I've never been.
And then there's like a school, and across from the school, she's taken over a cafe called Le Domino.
Okay, Le Domino.
I used to know the owners. I spent a summer there.
Okay.
I may or may not have hung out with them all summer long and helped them in their cafe.
Oh, there you go. That sounds like fun.
I did, actually.
There you go. Well, thank you, Lindsay. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Lindsay. Donuts.
Donuts for the donuts. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.